Good morning. I'm Cowden Ward, and this is the aircraft I have, P-51 Mustang. We call it Pecos Bill. It was owned several years ago by a gentleman out of Pecos, Texas, Bill Hubbs, who was the mayor of Pecos, Texas. And when he passed away, another gentleman picked it up and refitted it and refinished it and put Pecos Bill on it. And being from Texas, grew up with Walt Disney's Pecos Bill, that was a perfect match. But the plane actually was built in 1945. It never saw service in World War II. It went straight from the U.S. manufacturing to Canada and getting into the Canadian Air Force Reserve. After that, several years there, it was just kind of sold to a lot of different individuals. Bill Hubbs, who had it several years, also raced it in Reno. The plane itself never was commissioned as a fighter, so when we got it, we decided we'd go ahead and make a mission for Pecos Bill, because at the air shows we saw everybody else's P-51s with a certain squadron and all that type of stuff with their 51s. So we wanted to make our own, and Pecos Bill started flying World War II veterans complimentary. So that's where we come from. We are currently flying World War II veterans. We've flown over 130 of them. Plus also now we're involved with basically the PTSD program out of Fort Hood. This way we're just totally giving back to the veterans. We can't do enough for the veterans, and they really enjoy it. Primarily because it's a P-51. It's everybody's dream to fly. It's got a Packard-built V12 in it. It's got 1,600 horsepower. It's just like a Ferrari. Someone said the other day, it's just like driving a Ferrari, except it flies. And that's exactly the way it is. When I come up to an air show, basically I cruise at about 300 miles an hour. I'll pull the power way back to save the engine, keep the airplane just going real nice and smooth. And like I said, we burn about 60 gallons an hour. It costs us about $3,000 to fly this plane per hour. And that includes maintenance reserve, insurance, everything that goes in to keep this plane flying. And we're solely supported by donations. So that's what we do with Pecos Bill. As you can see, the guns were taken out. There were three guns on each side, 50 caliber. They were taken out to give us a cleaner wing. And yesterday I was talking to another 51 group, and some of the 51s, as you see at Airshow, whistles. And I've been asked about that, and what we have come up with is basically those that have the guns remaining in the wings give that whistle out. So we don't get any whistle with this one, but we still enjoy flying in the air shows. We fly at different air shows throughout Texas, Louisiana. We take it up to Oshkosh every year, and that's where we got involved with flying a lot of the Wasps. They're really fun. They're actually somewhat more fun to fly than the guys, because they always say, well, can we do a loop, can we do a road, et cetera, et cetera. And of course we say, anything you want, ma'am, anything you want, we'll do. And they're just a fantastic group of people anyway, the Wasps are. I can't say enough about them. But anyway, the plane is relatively easy to fly. Next door to us is a T6, and after you get about 200 hours in a T6, then you kind of start feeling your way into the Mustang. I took several lessons, of course, with other Mustang drivers, and got the feel of the plane, and finally just went ahead and started flying it myself. But the characteristics of the plane, it's actually easier to fly than the T6. The T6 was always called the pilot maker, and when the Army Air Corps cadets went through some flight training, when they came up to the T6 and went through that, then they were assigned the various airplanes, a fighter, air cargo, or bomber. So the T6 is a little bit harder to fly than this one, although this one here, of course, is quicker. You have to stay in front of it a little bit more, but you know, cross country, I just trim it up and just barely work that stick. So it's a true, once it's all trimmed out, it's really a true, comfortable, relatively easy plane to fly. Like I said, during takeoff and landing, you do have to stay in front of the plane. There is a thing called torque and P factor, and a lot of people kind of misconstrue that for different things. But we started off at takeoff. We just come up on our power gradually. We don't shove it to the throttle. We come up on it gradually, and that way the plane, we can start feeling the plane. We get the tail up. We got more control of the plane at that point. And of course, just go ahead and go right on up to 55 inches and get off the ground, pull the gear, and we're off and running. So that's the kind of technique there. And then of course landing is basically a tail wheel landing. We come in, we cross the wire at about 110 miles an hour, we settle down, you know, smooth it on the runway the best, and then just pull that sit back and plant the tail wheel. And what I'm going to point out is one thing that makes this plane so easy to maneuver on the ground is the width of these landing gear. If you see a lot of warbirds, P-40 and the Wildcat, their landing gear is rather narrow, and this one here is wide. It gives you a wide stance, gives you a comfort zone, and it's just that much easier to handle on the ground. Now what's funny, this is a North American P-51D model. The tires are the same tires you put on a T6. The tail wheel is the same size tires as a T6. And what's really bad about the tail wheel, there's only 2 manufacturers overseas that make them. We've had to send some of them back because they were not any good, basically. That's what happened to us on some tail wheels. But anyway, the gears, really a nice set of gears on this plane. It makes it nice and easy. And of course, all the gun mounts and all the hard rackles under here, we don't have any of that on this one. And we walk around here, and of course, you know, the 51, the ailerons were kind of unique because this plane was built for speed. That's all there is to it. The ailerons were made in such a way that there wasn't any drag hitting inside the ailerons and coming out. It flipped off of it. So all the way down, of course, the whole plane, except the rudder, is not fabric. It's all metal. You can just see the massive flaps. When I come down on landing, I use the flaps, and one thing you use in this plane more than anything is your trim. You're constantly taking off and landing, you're constantly working with the trim. But as you can see, the flaps are massive, and on downwind we start with 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees final on downwind. Then as we turn base, we go ahead and hit 40 degrees, and on final we hit 50 degrees. And that just gives you a tremendous amount of braking right here on these flaps. And one trick I was told and shown, and I use quite a bit on my landings, is that you go ahead and you got your throttle all the way back, of course, when you're landing, but you can also pull your mixture lean cutoff. It actually stops the engine while you're doing your ground roll, and at that point it slows it real fast, and then you kick it back on and restart the engine just about the end of your roll on landing. So another P-51 pilot told me in the war that he flew them, and he always popped about 10 degrees of flaps, or pulled it off to 50 into 40 when he was about ready to touch down, and it just sank that much quicker for him. So anyway, there's certain techniques you learn and you use with the 51, and you're always learning, you're always respecting the plane totally. You don't ever take this thing for granted, but it is a beautiful thing to fly. Coming on around here, you can see these like I said, you use a lot of trim, because when you're coming around, the guys in World War II, they're young kids, 21, 22-year-old, and I find it really amazing because when I come up and I do a wing over and come on down like that, I mean, you pick up 200 miles an hour in a New York minute. And then you're also there kind of doing some trimming, because you know that ball just loves to swing over, and you got to really put the rudder and work the trim to pull that thing and center that ball. And like Bud Anderson says, you got to have that ball centered if you're going to shoot down somebody, because if that ball's off, you're shooting out this way and you're looking this way. So it just has to be centered when you're flying the plane correctly. And these are the counterweights, because there's so much pressure coming across this control surface that they have put counterweights in it. Of course, the trim again is used constantly as you're flying the plane at different speeds and different configurations. Like I said, the rudder is the only thing on this plane that's fabric. But basically, I forgot to mention the tail wheel is an important thing with this plane, because it's a steerable tail wheel, and 6 degrees, and it really helps you on takeoff, of course, and on landing, because to control the airplane. But there's different techniques on taking off. We don't, like I said, use full power right at once. We just walk it up gently. 50 miles an hour, we just push the stick forward a little bit, and the tail comes up, and then you got a lot of control over the airplane at that point. But I mean, we're a caretaker. I am a caretaker of this aircraft. Someone else after me will take care of it. But these things, we just really try to take care of them as much as possible, and we fly them the same way. And that's really where it's all at as far as operating and having one of these 51s. You know, look over here. I mentioned the World War II vets that we fly. We have these up here on the fuselage. and each one of those V's stand for 5 veterans. And we've flown, like I said, about 130 World War II veterans, plus the WASP, and then add on to that PTSD, current servicemen and women. So basically, you just walk around the plane, and I'm not getting too technical stuff on this, but the basics, of course, it is air-cooled, water-cooled engine. The air comes through the radiator. Comes through the radiator. The after coolant comes through the radiator area. The radiator is divided in 2 different sections. And then back here also is the oil cooler. So it's just like an automobile. And actually, that's one of the things that make it such a speedy little airplane or fast aircraft is the way it's cooled. Anyway, it does not have a nice profile and sleekness to the aircraft. We have main tanks here. We don't have any reserve or tank in the rear like we used to. When we put 92 gallons in, I'll fly about an hour or 2 hours. My profile was fly 2 hours, set down, refuel, take a breather, and get back up. When I fly to Oshkosh or something like that, I always go through my 4-flight planning, and I plan, well, you know, how close to 2 hours before fuel. And of course, I'll look for the best price on fuel, of course. But I'll try to find 2 hours to fuel, then 2 hours after to go to my home, because we got about 3 hours in this plane total. So I always like to have an hour reserve when I'm flying cross country, just to give you that extra protection. It's just ridiculous to try to take this plane and go and try to stress the fuel, and all of a sudden, before you know it, things happen and you're having no fuel. So we just don't do that.